Hi, everybody. Welcome to PMO Advisory's monthly webinar series. This is month of February, and our topic here is mapping a journey from ideas to results. And the idea here, of course, is giving people, professionals who works for organization, a roadmap to understand how projects or ideas gets realized in a real environment. Let me start a little bit of introduction of myself. My name is Dr. T. Wu, and I am the CEO of PMO Advisory. At the same time, I'm also a university professor. I teach at Montclair State University and China Europe International Business School. And I'm also active volunteer in the project management community with the Project Management Institute, for example. I serve on various task and standard committees previously. I'm also right now the current director of Symposium for New York City chapter. I'm also a US team lead on a different team with the ISO side. I also have about 27 years of practical project management experience. As a matter of fact, even as we speak, the meeting I have right before this one is helping another client with managing a project build out of enterprise PMO. So I like to see myself dabble in multiple places, not only as a working professional, not only as a professor, but also someone who contributes to writing standards and research. And I hope to bring this body of knowledge and experience to bear. So today's objective for the presentation is quite straightforward: to present a roadmap that enables organizations to map their journey from vision to value, ultimately how to get things done. And yes, this is being recorded, and the people who couldn't attend the whole session, and some people come back to our webinar, it will be posted on our website, typically about, give or take, I would say about 5 days from now. So you could go to pmoadvisory.com webinar, and to see all the collections of the previous webinars that may be interesting to you. Okay? So please do have questions, and please send them via chit chat or just unmute. And by the way, I apologize for the background sound. My phone just happened to ring, and my fax machine right now is picking up. So just don't mind that, it will go away in a couple of seconds. So the first objective is really painting that roadmap. And second is talk about the strategic business execution and the key questions that organization team must address. And then finally, highlight certain important disciplines, the processes, the tools, techniques that enable organization to achieve business execution excellence, which I think is a very, very important topic. A couple of years ago, I think maybe 5 years ago, Harvard Business Review did a study, one of the articles did a study, I should say, and they asked Fortune 500 CEOs and asked, what is the new number one or number two challenges? And the idea of getting the right things done and in the right way, the business execution, which project, program, portfolio management clearly falls under, came as the number one of those challenges that pretty much everybody agreed on. Let's start with a quote. I think it's important to think about what are the writings in this area. Many of you probably heard of Jim Collins. He became quite famous for one of his latest book, which is Good to Great. And in there, he wrote, greatness is not a function of circumstances. Greatness, it turned out, is largely a matter of conscious choice and discipline. So you could apply that, by the way, to not just project role for your organization. You could apply that to your own world of who you want to be. I know some of my students, for example, on this call, I invited many of my university students, as well as colleagues and friends and customers of PMO Advisory, right? All of you, I'm sure, are interested in developing a better career and mapping out a roadmap for your own development. So some of the lessons here is not just at the institutional level, but it can be applied to the individual as well. So let's look at, in general, what is sort of a value creation process. How do you get ideas through various grind and come out with success, which ultimately are some kind of value, results, or benefits you want to achieve. This is an idealized model, of course, but it's a very simple model. Ultimately, you want to have the conscientious choice. What does that mean? Well, all of us are confronting the limitation of some kind, whether it is money, whether it is how many hours you have a day, which means that by its very nature, you cannot do everything. So you have to be selective and do the things that matters to you the most. That's what conscientious choice. If you don't have the ability to say no, and you say yes to everything, you could imagine that your schedule is just going to be bombarded with a ton of things, many of which probably unrelated and not really adding to your sense of accomplishment. So that's the first point, right? You have to be selective, make choices. The second is good resources. Now, it has many interpretations, but in the most general sense, it means that whatever you want to do, and that's meaningful, you want to be successful, you want to make sure that you give yourself the chance for success by providing adequate time, funding, resources in other ways to help you achieve that choice. Right? The third, of course, is now going back to a perhaps a more project world, what I call the executive support. One of the challenges that project managers often face is we may be asked to do projects that are not particularly well thought out. And along the way, the executives may not give you that support that you need, especially when you started to confront real issues and starting facing real set of challenges. So for projects to work in organization, it's more than just having made the right choice, getting the adequate resource. But when you get into a ditch, how do you come out of it? And that's where you need other people for support. And of course, you could say there's many other components, and that is true. But to me, these three things, meaning choosing the right project in the first place, having the adequate resources to do the job that's need to be done, and having the executive support to fight the battles and cover your back, frankly, those are the three most essential ingredients. Now, some people will ask, well, executive support, I'm working on personal matters. I don't need executive support. Not quite true. Most of the things, even if you work at individual level, some of you may be pursuing a certification or finishing a college degree or something else. Imagine you come home, it's cold, it's no food, nobody's there to help you. When you're down, nobody's there to comfort you, right? Even at the individual level, we need to build that support, whether the support of your spouse or boyfriend or girlfriend or family. Those are important because life is not smooth sailing. So when you confront that issue and challenge, who's going to help you and nudge you and give you a push that you could overcome that obstacle? So those are the three inputs. In the middle, you could see what I call discipline execution. In project management, which is my favorite topic, as many of you know, is one of the ways of having discipline execution. It's not the only one, by the way. There are other fields related. The entire field management is really about the planning, the organization, the execution, and the control. So all of that comes in. Discipline means that you try to do the right things all the time. And maybe not exactly all the time, because sometimes it could be very difficult, at least most of the time. And of course, the more you follow the processes, this is especially true in organizations when there are capabilities for doing projects, the more likely you're going to achieve success. The arrow key, the yield key, right? The arrow to the right to success. I always think that even if you do everything right, you could still, unfortunately or sadly, don't achieve the result. There are a lot of external factors that's just out of your control. So you do need that bit of luck. The luck could be sometimes just getting things out of the way, or some things magically happen. Um, so I would never really discount luck, even though it is hard to really plan for luck. Having said that, some people believe luck by definition is when opportunity meets planning. So the more you plan, the more you prepare yourself. If you're in school, the more you strengthen your education. If you are in the workplace, the more you can get certified. You're more likely to be able to meet the next downturn. Because why? You stand above the crowd. And with these four components, and luck being one of them, you have a lot greater chance of achieving success. Again, for those of you who just joined us, please feel free to use chat to ask questions. If you want, you could unmute yourself and ask questions, but I would ask you to remute yourself. And if it gets noisy, I'll just mute everybody. But usually we don't have that problem. If anything, we have the problem quite opposite. People not asking questions and not being engaged. And by the way, if there's nobody engaging, this would be a pretty quick webinar. We'll probably get done in maybe 35 minutes. So when we think about project management, when we look at what is this discipline execution, this is what I put into the latest book, Optimizing Project Management, which I also use, by the way, as a textbook in my college teachings. And in this book, I highlighted the 12 most important knowledge domains. Now, for those of you who are PMPs or who's familiar with project management body of knowledge, 10 of these are in the 6th edition of the PMBOK. What I added is 2 more, the conflict management and the governance. So to give everybody a sort of a quick flavor on what is this domain knowledge that we call the discipline in the center of that square. The first is the integration. In that sense, integration is the most important of the domains. Project managers or managers in general, if you're a professional, right? You can't really pass the buck. At some point, the excuse of, well, it's not me, I didn't do this, just somehow doesn't cut it. If you are in a position of leadership, as project managers typically are, the buck stops with you. So integration is the synthesis of all the other areas. And in some ways, it is the only area in which you as a project manager have to own. You cannot delegate this. You cannot say, well, I don't feel like being a project manager today. Why don't you, somebody else on the team, take over the project manager role? You may be able to shift the activities, but you cannot shift the accountabilities. The second area is stakeholder. Whenever there's things that's really meaningful that you need to get done, and projects should be quite meaningful, you have to think about who else are on this project or have influence. And on a large project, you have hundreds, sometimes thousands of stakeholders. One of the biggest project that I managed in terms of the stakeholder, I remember every single status meeting that I had on this large project, there were about 800 people on the list of invitees across the globe, 6 continents. I don't think anybody from Antarctica. And in order to have that right status meeting, we actually organized 3 sessions of the same status meeting, one for North South America, one for Europe, Africa, one for Asia and the Oceania countries, right? To make sure people can listen. Now, typically not all 800 people join, maybe across the 3 calls, somewhere around 400. And you could imagine those are the 400 stakeholders. Scope, the next area. Scope is pretty basic. Every project has some kind of end result in mind, whether it is to build a product, organize an event, attain certain goals. That is what the scope is. But the scope is more than the what that has been built. It's also the project management effort and other management effort that gets into it. So when we talk about scope, it's really the total scope. What are all the activities that needs to be performed in order to produce that result? Schedule. Schedule is probably the closest thing that's associated with project management, partly because project management derived originally in the 50s from schedule. The need to manage time. And typically back then was, how do we get this done? Things done quickly, right? DuPont built a chemical plant that started the critical path method. And that was really around when can we have the plan up and running. Next piece is resources. Resources in this case includes the people, the non-people resource, and the physical resource. So people, of course, pretty straightforward. As you can imagine, we need the worker bees project teams. Most project needs some kind of input of resources. If we build a product, let's say it's the next iPhone, well, there got to be some kind of chip, for example, or glass for that phone, right? Physical. But there also could be non-physical and non-human resources. This could be intellectual properties, licenses. All of those can be non-physical. In some ways, if you think about project management, it is sort of the magic black box. You have a bunch of inputs called the resources. The black box is what do you do with it? You grind it up, and here output are the results. The costs, pretty straightforward. Things aren't free. People, properties, intellectual all have costs. So the cost is really managing the funding, sometimes the cash flow of the project. The sixth area, communication. Communication is often one of the most often mentioned trouble areas in projects. Given we, the human, have a lot of idiosyncrasies, you could have a project, and by the way, I did this. Some years ago, I helped my university, Montclair State University, manage the network implementation upgrade. So we upgraded practically every single wireless and network component in the entire university. There were thousands of components. And it was a I think it was a 14-month project. So slightly multiple years. And at the end of the project, we sent out a survey to the entire campus, university. And this is about 5 years ago, by the way. Still getting survey results back, interestingly. Asked people, one of the questions, how well did we communicate? Did we communicate too much, too little, or just right? One of those questions were asked. And it was really funny how all the answer came back. About a third said we communicated too much. A third said we communicated too little. And a third communicated that we just did it right. So I jokingly said, well, we must have done something right because the average is just right. So it's a perennial problem area for communication. Quality is what is the quality level that people need to achieve. For example, my famous example I always use is a D ring, for example, for mountain climbing. Will you trust that D ring for 99 cents in a 99-cent store, in the dollar store, to hold you on the side of a mountain? The answer is probably not, even though that D ring probably could hold hundreds of pounds. Right? This is probably where you don't want to be particularly skimpy and get something that is certified. So you can understand the concept of quality. Supply chain. Supply chain in project management is in some ways getting more and more important, mainly because company for the last 2-3 decades has focused on what we call core competence, what they do best. But project by its very nature are investment of future. It tends to be beyond what you already have done, which means you need to acquire external resources to do the work. Risk. What are the things that can just be surprises? It doesn't even have to be negative, by the way. Risk in project management could be opportunities, could be positive, but these are uncertainties that you don't know. So, for example, as a risk mitigation, I order food delivery to my house every single week, so we don't have to do as much shopping. And sadly, the food's supposed to arrive on Monday, and so far hasn't arrived due to the snowstorm. Now, my wife and I are pretty good managers, so we already started stocking up on other food, so we haven't yet go hungry. But after this call today, if the food still doesn't arrive, I need to now mitigate the risk of the rest of the week having food in my house. Right? So in this case, the storm was the risk. The two areas that we added, or I added in the optimizing project management, is one, conflict. Conflict, by the way, was highlighted in the project management body of knowledge, but they tend to deal with only personality or interpersonal conflicts. Here, I think conflicts are far broader on projects because project by its almost very definition are like doing things in a pressure cooker, versus normal cooking. Chances are when you start compressing schedule, resources, and defining what you have to achieve, anytime when you start pushing these boundaries, it starts to get into disagreements on how to do things, right? It creates a more intense environment, which itself is rife for more conflict. So project managers have to deal with conflicts. The final one is governance. And this is probably more applied to bigger projects, even though smaller project idea works the same. But projects confronts difficult choices. Typically, no organization have enough money to do everything they want to do. For example, some years ago, many of you may remember, Microsoft, for example, is known to have pretty poor quality um, software. Every time when there's a major upgrade of something, there's a lot of bugs. And sometimes we have what we call the green screen of death, which of course these days tend to be color screen. Green screen were popular back in the mid 80s. But don't you think Microsoft know that? Don't you think they know their software buggy? So why are they releasing it anyway? Right? And these are governance choices because the way they look at it is if we do another round of testing in which the software will be better, but it'll take another month and we miss, say, the holiday window to put on computers and sell it for the Christmas season. So our choice is, okay, we'll release the buggy software. Fast forward today, by the way, you see this phenomenon, and I'm sure all of you see it. When there's a major upgrade, say your iOS on your phone, let's say version 14 upgrade, probably within a week, you're going to get version 14.1, and probably within another 2 weeks, you get version 0.4, .1.1, if not multiple releases. And the reason all these happen is, of course, there are bugs, but they decide to release it anyway because they didn't want to miss the window. Now, that's just an example of decisions, but there could be many other decisions, and that's what governance is. So going back to the idea of doing things well, the disciplined execution, what I just described in summary is for project management. Okay, let's move on. The reality, by the way, the process before shown is idealized. The reality, of course, is pretty harsh. Study has repeatedly shown that project success aren't particularly high, especially in some industry. There is a company that I'm not going to talk about here in detail, but Standish Group, they assess IT projects for almost 30 years now, right? I think since 1994. So coming up to 30 years in a couple of years. And what they have consistently shown their result is that about a third of the projects utterly fail, meaning they're just not even rescuable. They're dead. They never deliver anything close to what they tried to do. About another 40% or so are challenged, meaning that they're done. But they spend a lot more money, a lot more time, went off track. So there were major problems and challenges, but at least they were done. And then the remaining about 20% are projects that just are successful purely. So when you look at the success project, it's really only hovers maybe 25% or so, with another 40, 50% project heavily challenged, and then another 20% of project just utterly fail. So when you look at the challenge projects plus the failed project, it hovers around 70%. And that's what we see in IT industry. Now, other industry have different records. I'm not to say here saying all the major projects have this kind of numbers. They don't. But they are fairly harsh. So I'm not going to read through all of them here, but here just give you some flavor of what are the harsh reality on the project. By the way, harsh reality also give opportunities. For those of you, especially my students, considering project management, you may be graduating or doing your MBA. What do I want to do next? The harsh reality also means there's plenty of opportunity. meaning there's a lot of room for improvement. Harsh reality also means that because companies don't get them done particularly well, they frankly need more smart and trained people to do that. As I'm scanning the name, I see one of my friends here who recently finished the PMP. First of all, congratulations to her. But putting that aside, why does she pursue PMP? Why should you pursue your certification? Because you're now better equipped to deal with these harsh situations. Okay, so I'm not going to read this. For those of you who's watching this on video, you may want to pause here and just take a look at this slide. Oops, jumping too far. So the current result of this strategy implementation is a slide I pull out from my other deck, just to give you some sense of the relative success rate out there. On strategic implementation, and these are big projects. These are usually the board level, with the C-level decision, we're going to do something bold. Sadly, the track record for success on these ultra large projects are just bad. Now, I'm not saying it's always 90% failure, right? That just seems harsh. But it is probably safe to say easily somewhere between 70 to 90% didn't achieve what they started out to achieve. If you think about that, there's actually another survey that's not here that showed that most executives working on these initiatives, even starting out at the gate, didn't actually expect their initiative to be successful. That's how bad it is. Another number, 47% of the survey, this is a survey that my organization did back in 2014. 47% believe that business execution, which project management is a part of, is extremely important for their organization. Keyword is extremely. And yet, in that same study, in a slightly later different study, that shows that their success rate hovers right around that 10%, which is number 3. By the way, these are independent studies, so echoing the same number. And then of the survey that I mentioned, Harvard Business Review some year ago, I think it was around 2015, 5 years ago, I think I said, they asked 400 global CEOs, and number one challenge facing and responded by all 400 CEOs is business execution. Going through the common, the 12 knowledge domains before, if you look at what are the challenges that could happen, here is a high-level list. Now, I'm not, again, going to redo the slide. I think before I went through enough of it to give you understanding what are these 12 dimensions. But these are just some of the common problems. And this doesn't include even challenges that really come sometimes on severely highly compressed project schedules, right? So very common problem, take scope, right? Scope problem became so big in the late 1990s that project management itself actually splintered into 2 major schools. One is what we call the traditional or predictive. Some people use the word waterfall. And in the predictive waterfall methodology for project management, generally speaking, is think of it sort of that if you're going to shooting range, archery, right? Ready, aim, fire. Ready meaning you get your bows and your arrows and quivers are ready. Make sure you find where the target is, right? Ready, aim, you pull your string, aim your arrow at that target, and then you fire. Very, very logical approach doing project management. We call that predictive project management. So we figure out what we want to do. We evaluate all the options, decide on a plan to make sure we could do the plan, and then execute against the plan. Waterfall method. The problem with the scope became so severe in the late 90s, especially on information technology project, that there's a bunch of people started developing what we now call agile approach. Agile today became so popular that even in the latest project management professional exam, PMP exam, starting January 2021, 50% of the questions have some agile flavor to it. And what agile argues is instead of the traditional ready, aim, and fire and do things in one big swoop, is break it up into small increments. So instead of building the website over a course of a year. Can we build it in 5 different modules, each being about 2 months, give or take, and get to the same result? So this way, we have time to share with our customer, get feedback, make any fixes, instead of getting it done all a year later and found out we didn't do the right thing. So today, what's a buzzword in our industry or in our profession for project management is, what method should we use? Should we use predictive, or should we use adaptive methods such as agile? So that's just focusing on one scope. So you can see the scope problem alone give rise to agile methodology. And by the way, just a quick note on agile, there's a lot of them. Later, we'll show you a slide that there's somewhere around 250 different agile certifications. Amazing. One of the big challenges with project management is getting to sort of what is the solution to all these problems, right? A very common question people ask, okay, so T, thank you for sharing all the problems. What do we do about it? The problem is, part of the problem with us, I think, in the project management field, is that there are actually really quite a lot of solutions. If anything, there's a proliferation of too many solutions. One of the significant issues I think that we're facing currently is to really find the best approach to deal with inadequacies. You know, in project management, as I mentioned, there is a heat exchange, not only between the traditional agile methods, but also within the agile itself. As I alluded to, the agile certification review.com, for those of you on the call thinking about, oh, maybe I should pursue something agile. There are over 250 agile certifications and growing, by the way, across 40 different certification bodies, resulting in a huge significant confusion and overlap. So my suggestion for a lot of the professionals, instead of joining this race, that I call the rat race, to get more certification, organization professionals should focus on what are the key problems and challenges and adopt what truly worked, good business practices. And this is in some ways that is one word, sort of one, I should say, key set of words to encapsulate what my company PMO Advisory tried to do. We are largely agnostic about a particular methodology. What we help our clients is try to find the nice blend that works across a lot of different projects and suitable and customize it for their situation. Another thing to do is, especially for people who sort of want to think about in a more visionary sense, right? This is titled, this journey from ideas to results. Well, ideas are visions. What I often like to do as a management consultant is, let's take a step back and look at the problem. The basic of the problem is ask the question, what do organizations truly do? In some ways, it's a fairly simple answer. Organizations, at least the viable, good ones, they have to do 3 things. They have to plan what they want to achieve. They have to keep the lights on through the operation, and they have to manage changes. So when you expand that, planning is really about developing the good strategy, make sure that you have the right vision, the mission, the philosophy, the culture. You probably want to have a good process to develop ideas and make sure there are accountability to those ideas once they're approved. In business, we call that business case, develop a good business case. You also want to look a little bit more across the organization instead of locally at your own specific project, and cultivate a bias toward action and execution. So this is really the first step in this roadmap from ideas or vision to achieving results and value. The second step, you start thinking about how do you make those changes happen? And there are many bullets underneath here, but very quickly, make sure they have clear business objectives in mind and prioritize investment choices. Establish good governance for those difficult decisions. Create a nurturing environment so the team can be successful. Make sure you invest in people and boost skills. This is especially true if organization plan to do more of similar type of project. Talent, capability, and capacity. Adopt tried and true method. I often advise clients, don't go implement, agile scrum, for example, because somebody told you it's nice. That could be very nice for them. I'm not saying they lied, but it may not be true for you. Strengthen across multiple disciplines in key areas such as project and operation management. Build a culture of responsibility. Some people say accountability, which probably is a slightly better word. Focus on solutioning and achieving results. And once you have that changing environment under control, you can now move into the operation or the operating, making sure that whatever you build are transition and that they can sustain that positive outcome. Capture and leverage any knowledge learned, map the results to the business case. So now you know the results you achieve are the ideas that you have approved, and then sustain value delivery to continuous improvement. So that's a simple roadmap of the plan, the change, the operate. When you look at organization roadmap, for example, this is one of my favorite slides that I created some time ago. This is, of course, idealized and representative, but you can see all the planning activities. Now, I'm not saying every company have every one of these, so you have to adjust it. But even if you run a corner grocery store or corner candy store, right? I'm sure some of you live in neighborhood that they still exist, even though not very often anymore. But somebody in that store have to count how many candies they sold and replenish those candies. So next week there's more candy to be sold. If they replenish the wrong candy, then they sadly will have stockpiled candies that may not be sold for a while. And of course, lose business because the candies people want to buy is no longer there. So even there, in that simple business, somebody had to count the candies. That's a part of planning. Now, large business, of course, have a lot more difficult time counting candies. They probably have executive offsites. Well, these days, probably executive Zoom meetings, right? To plan out what they need to do. Look at the operating. On the flip side is how do you keep the lights on? Every organization, successful or at least viable organization, have a plan to keep the lights on. This keeping the lights on could be as simple as counting the candies, replenishing candy, shelf, putting the candies on the shelf and make sure people buy it. Or it can get quite complicated. Take my school, Montclair State University. What is our basic way of keeping lights on? Well, it's the students. They come in, pay our tuition. Hopefully we make a lot of money, and maybe not. But we also in turn give them their education. And over a course of 4 years, MBA students typically within 2 years, they get a diploma, which is a value add to their credential. In that exchange, keeping the lights on, the school has enough money to survive and also to educate the students, gaining new knowledge and experience and make it more worthwhile and valuable in the workplace. But what's hard is the middle piece, this changing piece. Imagine if I teach project management, as you could imagine, come to my classes and I proudly say, hey, welcome to my class. I have not changed this course since the 1950s. Right, first of all, I'm not that old, but the point here being is that seems a little stale. How many people go out today, go buy a phone from 2010? Right? You don't. Why not? Even if you don't chase after the latest model, you still want something that works. So organization, whether it's Apple with their iPhone or Montclair State University with our courses, or even Nabisco, which I use to work making cookies, they're constantly looking for new ways to deliver that cookie, that education, or that device. And the changing piece is where the project program portfolio truly kicks in. Projects are about building the next, say, class that is innovative and new so our students can benefit. Program generally means, in this case, a collection of highly related projects. So maybe our school university, take Montclair, created a new school of nursing. That's not a single project. It needs professors to run various courses, and there needs to be a structure for the department. So it's really more like a program, a collection of highly related projects. or portfolio. In this case, take any large companies. Apple has a portfolio of mobile devices, right? From not just iPhone, but also tablets. They have portfolio of different software, from iTunes to the latest that they put in Apple News. These are investment choices. And typically in the changing space, it requires a multidisciplinary approach. This is where not just project management itself, but maybe there's change to organization, business processes, other changes that requires additional skills. So this organization map, somewhat representative, is really a good way of looking at how organizations work. And focusing on just the project program portfolio, given that's my specialty, you could also break the world of project program portfolio. By the way, sometimes we call it the 3P, the project program portfolio, into two areas. The portfolio management is really more about trying to do the right things. You go through the process of portfolio to do the right selection of project, the right governance, allocation resources, so you have the right amount of people and material. And then the program management and project management is more about doing them in the right way to maximize the effectiveness, minimize waste, deliver the project efficiently. On one of the last slide here, I want to talk about for people who's involved in this. I'm sure people in work, or maybe even students, have come across this sort of dynamic between what is a manager and what is a leader, or what is the concept of management versus leadership. In project program world, this matters a lot. So here I'd like to highlight a couple of the components. When you have a manager mentality, is one of the key questions applying to project management is, how can I successfully complete this project? I think a lot of you who, for example, manage a project ask that question. That's a good starting point. But if you want to be a leader, the question shifts slightly. It's not that you don't care about completing the project. The project is something tactical. What is the project trying to do? So the question shifts to results. How can I achieve the desired result? So I'll give you an example. Earlier in my career, my boss one day came and said, "T, can you help me go manage this project? And this is what you should do. And this is the resource we're going to dedicate, invest in, go and complete the project." At the time, I was a young project manager, still learning my ropes, so to speak. And I was excited. This was my first leadership experience, and I go to lead that project. And the project came out pretty well. We delivered ultimately on schedule, maybe a little bit over the budget, but not too much. So my boss was pretty happy. But we found out something downstream. Nobody used it. We were building an internal system designed to capture knowledge from the various consulting assignments that we had in the organization. And once done, we thinking the project is over, the people who were supposed to use it never used it. So back then, of course, I had that manager mentality. Yes, I got the work done, but I didn't really ask the question, did we achieve the right result? Fast forward 10 years later, which was one of the largest projects I mentioned before, it was 800 stakeholders coming to my meetings. That project turned out, and I didn't know it at the time when I took over the leadership, failed to implement 6 times before. I actually thought only failed once before. So when I took over the project, but this time now being more senior in the organization, senior in my own profession, I asked the question essentially, what are we trying to achieve? And by the way, is the project we're doing even the right project? And one of the first things we did is we fundamentally looked at, why are we doing this project? What are the results or value that we want to achieve? And then we go back and ask the question, how are we going to achieve that? And what we found is, while at the time we knew one earlier failure, it turned out to be 6 earlier failures, the focus was too much on the technology side. It was never focused on how do we get people to use it. We always focus on what is the best way to, and this was a master data management project. How do we best, massage data, clean up data, consolidate data, deduplicate data? Business people don't care about that. They just care, do we have the right data? So by flipping the question around, in about the first month after I took over the project, I went back to the management saying, guys, I propose we do a different project. The project that you asked me to do, if we do it again, we just have the second failure. As it turned out, it would have been the eighth failure. I just was only with the organization that long, so I only saw one failure before. But my proposal is, let's do it differently. Let's rethink about this project, and this is how we could get to the result. And ultimately, the company convinced my boss, the chief technology officer, his boss, the chief information officer, and we went and did it differently. In this case, we did a very, very what I call high touch approach, meaning getting people involved, getting people engaged, answering their hard question first. And if we don't have the answer, we're very open about it. Sorry, we don't know the answer, but we'll try to go back and find it for you. And that's why we have status meeting of 800 people, because most other projects don't have 800 people showing up to a status meeting. And by the way, that's not the doer. That's just people, leads on those different teams that came to the status meeting. So total involvement of that project is probably in, I would say, at least 4-digit in terms of number of people working on the project. That's the difference in mentality. So when you look at the basic question of why, what, and how, a manager asks, and by the way, manager mentality is pretty tough to reach. This is not a low bar. Most people I hire for project manager, I'd be happy if they have this manager mentality. But under why is, what are the business case? Should I accept it? Provide their inputs and insights, manage business case, return on investment, right? So they do their job well. On the what, they usually follow very good direction on the scope, track and manage change like good project managers will do, coordinate communication. On the how, they tend to focus on how to efficiently manage the product or the project and deliver ultimately the expected value. So having that manager mentality and do everything well, that's not a low bar. That's a pretty successful bar. But the leaders, though, ask a slightly different question. They think a little bit deeper. They think of more results in long term. The question is, they review the business case very carefully, and they really ask, can we achieve this? They question the ROI and probably try to find new business value. They examine both short-term and long-term benefits. Under what? They may decide to make changes and recommendations on scope and requirements, and then convince the people that it is the right thing to do. Collaborate on methods and ideas, engage stakeholders to get their input. One reason that we engage 800 people is, frankly, is we'd rather have their objections out in the open than shove under the rug somewhere and then pop its rear head somewhere downstream. And even if we can solve it, even if our solution doesn't necessarily meet their expectation, we at least upfront and say it. Because why? Because one person out of 799 wanted something else, the other 799 maybe would likely come in and straighten everybody out. But this way we do it transparently. So we focus on both the efficiency and the effectiveness to really enhance that overall deliverable. So if you want to achieve your ideas and get to results, think about this dynamic. What's on the left, the manager mentality, by the way, is not easy to achieve. It takes a real professional to achieve that. But if you want to leap from being a good manager to also a good leader, you have to jump over to the side on the right. And by the way, I should mention that when I think of a good leader, by definition, they're probably a pretty good manager too. I don't think there's such a thing as a good leader, especially in the project space that we talk about, that's a lousy manager. Because otherwise, you're just shooting off your cuff. You could have the grandest vision in the world, thinking yourself as the greatest leader, but you can't get anything done. In our world of project program portfolio, that just means somebody's a loudmouth or visionary who couldn't get things done. So by definition, a good project leader are also good manager. This largely concludes my presentation. If you have questions, it is coming up to the hour. Feel free to ask them now. But as I wait for a couple questions, hopefully come into the chat, a little bit about the company. We are a project management authorized training partner, and we do project management training and consulting. For those who attended this because you want to earn PDU, you can. You should write down this claims code, and I'll pause here for you to write them. But as a authorized training partner, if you are certified in project management, this gives you 1 hour of PDU. In this case, it's a strategic PDU. Okay, so you could come back and check this out, but I'll pause here and come back to the screen. And if you're not certified, don't worry about it. Thank you. Hopefully people have questions. People hopefully found this to be informative and fun. If you have any questions, please ask them now. Other than that, this is my information, so feel free to stay connected. As I mentioned earlier, this is being recorded. This will be on our website probably about 5 days from now. If you go to the last link here, you'll find this and other previous recording on our website. By the way, this picture is when I was a lot younger and before I shoveled snow. Man, the last 2 days of snow removal, I think, aged me at least. So I'll bring it back to this code for those who need to write down. Are there any questions? Okay, going once, going twice. Well, thank you everybody for joining today's session. I hope you found this presentation of really bringing ideas to fruition to be valuable. Well, I see there is a question. Am I considered certified without license but earn certificate? I have to say I'm not sure how to answer that question because I don't understand the question. So, Zarita, you may want to unmute and ask the question or retype the question. Okay, I see a couple other questions. What are the common method ways to quantify project benefit? That's a really good questions. For project managers, the easiest thing to do in some ways is hopefully the project worker has a business case. And every business case should have the project benefits that they want to achieve. So you have a starting point. If you don't have that, then there's 2 ways to look at it. One is look at what the project is building. And ultimately, from whatever it's trying to achieve, there's a certain set of benefits that you can use. And that's a tangible benefits. The second set of benefits for organization is how does it improve the organization by going through this process? So a lot of organizations have goals for improving their workforce, building new knowledge and capability. Those benefits are in some ways side benefits because the goal of the project is to achieve the results, but they can be genuine benefit as well. Professor, so our extra credit, what do we have to do? So this question is already posted announcement, but if you write a summary and post them in the follow the instruction announcement, you can gain 5 extra points. See, thank you, thank you, thank you. Have a good day. Okay, so going back to original question, I earned a certificate in project management from Rutgers University, but am not a licensed PM. What role is considered certified? The last question doesn't make sense, mainly because certification is usually by a third-party authorizing body. Around the world, probably the most important and consequential of the authorizing body is from Project Management Institute, PMI. And if you go to pmi.org, under certification, you could see there are roughly 8 certifications. PMP is typically viewed as the most important and common of the certification. So you have to go through the certification process to attain that certification. Typically, jobs don't come with a certification. They may come with a requirement for certification. So a lot of government jobs, federal government jobs in project management for professionals will request that you have a PMP or something equivalent. It doesn't have to be PMP. And the other side I will add is certain organization like Boeing or IBM has internally built project management certifications. So if you work for IBM or Boeing or some of these other large companies, they may have internal certifications as well. How do we access the recording again? This recording will be on www.pmoadvisory.com/webinar in about 5 days. One question, why are some strategy to assess not only qualitative but quantitative risk to ensure organizations are aware and track risk properly? What are some of the strategies? You know, that's a really good question. It's probably beyond the scope of what we can cover today. But generally, the strategies around risk is at first, make sure you cast a net pretty wide to identify as many risks as you can on a given project. Now, almost immediately, you have to make a judgment call. What are the risks that's worth tracking? And what are the risks, just everyday risk? Right? The fact that we are alive, we go outside, there's a risk. COVID-19 obviously increased that risk significantly. So some risks are frankly not necessarily worth tracking, but other risks definitely are. So there is a judgment call. The second step, I think, is the best, is figure out what is your organization's risk appetite, right? And by the way, some people will say that's the first step. That's okay too. So either first or second, but understand what is the environment and the appetite for risk in which you're working. And from there, when you look at the risks that you have, you ask, let's say there's a couple important risks, you ask the basic question, how can you quantify them? How do you assess probability? How do you assess impact? How do you assess the ways that you can try to either make the risk happen, because this could be positive risk opportunity, or make the risk not happen, such as threat. And as much as you could put numbers to it, quantitative, the more accurate they tend to be. But some cases you can't, you just don't know. Then that's where I would say qualitative is almost always a fallback. That's how I will approach that. Okay, now we are definitely on the top of hours, and I see I exhausted everybody's question. I appreciate everybody's attending this session. Hope you found this to be useful. Again, we have monthly webinars. And by the way, when we say monthly, it's not always monthly. We sometimes have it multiple times a month, but we try to do it at least once a month to give hopefully the world professionals a chance to learn something new. Thank you, everybody. Stay warm. Hopefully everybody's not digging out of the snow anymore. Let me go back to post the PDU slide. I am going to end the recording. I'll stay for a couple more minutes should you have questions. Thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful day.